Do you feel unsafe in your environment or the world around you? Do you feel unstable? Are you struggling with anxieties about your future, what to do, or who you think you should be? Do you feel as though the world is falling apart and we have no control? This is Soul Mechanics, practical tune-ups to be a healthy human, and I'm your host, Kate Foley. Define fear. What does fear mean to you? How do you experience fear? What is your relationship with fear? Are you intimate partners? Is it casual? Do you have a daily dialogue with fear? Do you stoke other people's fears? Fear has a very important role for survival. When our lives are in danger, we need to either fight the threat or run away from the threat. Fight or flight, as many of us have learned time and time again. This fight or flight response is associated with our sympathetic nervous system. This part of our nervous system, when engaged, is associated with adrenaline, shunting blood from the peripheral parts of the body to the organs, mainly the heart, lungs, and brain. Digestion ceases or slows tremendously. Our pupils narrow. Our heartbeat speeds up. Breathing increases. We use the upper chest muscles for more shallow and stressed breathing. Our palms sweat. The body prepares us to actually fight or run, sometimes both. This response is not intended to last for long periods of time. It is intended to remove us from the threatening situation so that our parasympathetic nervous system can be engaged. When the parasympathetic nervous system is engaged, it serves as the rest and digest response. With the parasympathetic nervous system, our hearts slow, breathing is more rhythmic and deeper, and we use more of the lower rib cage muscles to breathe. The blood flows to the periphery, warming the hands and feet. Our pupils dilate, peristalsis ensues, homeostasis returns. Fear is an alert. It has its place in our intuitive system. It is valuable for the survival and to avoid harm. But we are not supposed to be living in constant fear. It isn't healthy. Homeostasis is equilibrium, or the balance of our various physiological components. We want and like homeostasis. Something that many of us are beginning to realize is that homeostasis isn't completely beyond our control. It isn't something that we leave to external forces to ensure it happens. Our thoughts and emotional states have a very real impact on our health and well-being. Back in the 1980s and prior, the Western medical community was not keen on admitting that stress could impact our health. Now, it's a part of nearly every medical questionnaire. One of the issues, though, is that maybe you can't perceive the stress in your life and body. Maybe you were raised to believe that worry, concern, and racing thoughts were natural and productive. Maybe you were raised in a violent household, and that's familiar to you. So subconsciously you gravitate towards stressful situations and they seem normal. Or perhaps you've sustained a severe head trauma, and the way you react to situations is through a stress response. Maybe you have a job that requires you to work 70 hours per week, and the only thing keeping you going is 10 cups of coffee per day. You may not be cognizant of your stress, but your body knows. Your body gives you signs all the time. The fight or flight response is not something you should experience when you wake up to go to work in the morning, nor is it something you should experience while watching the news or backing your car out of your driveway. This is a fear response. We are not victims to fear. We do not have to experience this every time something happens that is beyond our control. We have the capability to train our brains to respond differently to situations. For instance, let's say you're a woman and you're told day after day that 1 in 3 women are sexually assaulted. You see and hear story after story about women being sexually assaulted in cities and towns across the country. You might even know some women who've been sexually assaulted. You begin to think after a while that the world isn't safe for you. You begin to think that men in general aren't safe. When you walk in a park, you begin to feel suspicious of every man you encounter. After a while, this feeling of lack of safety turns into a feeling of danger. This can go in many directions at this point, but typically, it snowballs into a fearful belief system. Even if this is all true, even if every man you encounter has suspicious motivations, do you really want to live this way? Do you really want to perceive the world this way? I don't think it's naive to choose a different perspective. When we live in a fearful state, we tend to react to benevolent situations and people as if they have malicious intentions. That fear response begins to inhabit your physical being. What if you began to react to every man with suspicion and fear? What if it became so automatic that it became subtle? So every encounter with a man leaves you suspicious and untrusting. You don't lose your appetite, but you just don't feel like eating in the presence of a man. You're not vigilant, but your senses are sharper. You aren't ready to run, but your shoulders are tense and elevated. You don't feel an adrenaline rush, but your blood pressure slightly rises. You don't sense these subtle reactions to your fear-based belief system because no one is challenging it. One day, you decide you want a male partner. You want to get out and meet somebody. You want to start dating men. How do you think that's going to go? Fear is contagious. Not only is it contagious, but it is marketed. How many times have you been led to the worst case scenario without even realizing that you've been led there? What do we tend to fear? Losing independence? Losing our way of life? Losing people we love? Change in familiar settings? Change in routine? Illness? Destruction? Uncertainty? The list goes on. Most people have experienced contagious fear at some point in time in their lives. When one person begins to spiral into fear, anyone around them can feel it. And if other people share a similar fear, their fears ignite. One example in my recent memory is during the COVID pandemic lockdown. I was in a grocery store waiting in the checkout line. Everyone was masked. I was about 5 people back from the register when I witnessed a woman checking out and speaking to the cashier. The cashier leaned forward and said, "I'm sorry, I can't understand you." The woman lowered her mask to speak. Then the woman behind her began to scream, saying, "You're putting all of us at risk. My daughter is a nurse and she is exposed by ignorant people like you." The woman in front of her quickly resituated her mask, put her head down, paid the cashier, and scurried out. There was a silence that blanketed the store after that. I saw people peek around the aisle end caps. I saw some people standing stunned with their hands on their chests. People around me began to whisper to each other, "Why would she lower her mask like that? Some people are so selfish. Oh my God, my daughter is a nurse too. This is so scary." I stood there thinking, this is fear. Fear isn't just contagious. Fear is also very insidious. If you indulge it and bolster its presence in your life, it will ooze into everything you do, every thought, your choices, your relationships, your work, and certainly your health. If you allow fearful thoughts, and I am emphasizing the word allow, they will spread. Is there any rationality to a fear response when there is no imminent danger? How do you think your body reacts to that level of fear? If you're aware that you're feeling fear and your life is not in danger, how can you react differently? Or how can you act versus react? Also, if you're having a fear reaction and you are not able to think rationally, do you think you can be compassionate and selfless in that state of mind? Are you more or less capable of harming someone else during a fear response? Unfortunately, I've had a lot of training with fear responses. I say unfortunately because I have had several circumstances when my life has been in imminent danger. My experiences have led me to seek training in crisis intervention and counseling. I have been in intimate partnership with fear countless times in my life. I understand its power and necessity, but I also understand its damaging effects. So I do have some suggestions when encountering fear. First, acknowledge and feel the fear. Describe it. Where do you feel fear? Is it attached to your history? If you don't have a memory, what image comes to you? Or is the feeling reminiscent of a previous feeling? Is this particular fear familiar? Do you feel like a child with this fear? Where does this fear lead you? On the other hand, if you're feeling fear because of imminent danger, it's also important to acknowledge that you're feeling fear. It is important to identify fear because we don't want this as a constant companion. Second, question your fear. Does it have a purpose? Is it really fear that you're feeling? Perhaps you're reacting with fear because you aren't comfortable with expressing the actual emotion. Or perhaps you're feeling fear because you've lost control of a situation in your life. Sometimes when you clarify your feelings and reformat your statement to yourself, the fear subsides. Also, look around you. Immerse yourself in your present surroundings. Do you see any danger? Can you be certain that someone or several people want to harm you? Find the source to your fear. Is it information you heard on the news? Are you reading about your lack of safety on a regular basis? Or maybe you were told at an early age that you needed to fear certain people or circumstances. Maybe you were told you needed to be afraid because of who you are. How does this play out day to day for you? Third, gather information. Many times we feel fear about a situation or a person because we're lacking information and understanding. If we can understand a situation better, we don't fear it. Also, when we're gathering information, we have something to distract us from our fear. It's important to be objective when you're gathering information. It's vitally important to seek understanding rather than to support an already formed belief. Fear can be paralyzing because we feel helpless. Even if you don't have resources available to gather information, you have your senses. Observation is an incredible tool for gathering information. You can use your eyes, ears, nose, and skin to gather information. But again, try your best to be objective. And finally, act. Make a plan, or don't make a plan, but take action toward moving your fear. Fear subsides after the fight or flight. All the physiological components leading to the fear response are there to propel you into a calmer state. So maybe, as a last resort, if you're in such a panic and you can't see past your fearful flags, if you can't question your fear, if you can't gather information, then run, or punch a big soft pillow, or scream into that pillow. Express your fearful urge. Pretend like you're being chased. Get it out. Exhaust your body and rest your mind. So many of our problems can be resolved with more information. But it's the waiting period that's the problem. It's the time between knowing there's a problem and receiving more information that the fear and irrational behavior begins. Fear, in my opinion, is a stimulus type of emotion. It's only an alert to a threat. But if we aren't questioning the threat, this can plunge us into a full-on panic or rage. If we're considering anything interrupting our plans or expectations as a threat, is fear really a reasonable response? Although fear has its place for survival, we are evolving past basic survival situations. We may be responding to a sophisticated situation with an emotion that is suitable as a crude response. How do we change that? We need to utilize the more sophisticated part of our brain. What is that? Question the emotion. Use compassion. Be curious. Seek to understand. Be creative in your solutions. What does that mean? It means tap into wisdom and inspiration, rather than narrowing your focus on eliminating the problem. If the problem is a pile of rocks in your way, your fear will have you lift each rock out of your path and leave you exhausted and despondent. Your wisdom will show you the path around the pile of rocks so you can skip along whistling and enjoy the elevated views. Fear and doubt have their place in our lives. They aren't useless emotions that need to be banished. In my opinion, emotions like fear and doubt are here for self-understanding. They do play a crucial part in our lives. They alert us to a block in our mental, emotional, and/or spiritual physiology. Now, if you're thinking a block, I don't want any blocks. I want to remain healthy and free of restrictions. Well, I have news for you. We all have blocks. We all have illness, or darkness, or lunacy, or meanness, or God forbid, negativity. Whatever you want to consider a block, we all have them. And we're here to work our way through them until the next one. These blocks or restrictions are just challenges. I've had to remind myself of this time and time again. I have friends and spiritual directors and therapists who remind me on a regular basis. Every time I encounter a personal block or challenge, it feels like the first time. I freak out, I overanalyze, I sink into my own silent lake of melancholy. Then I lift my head and I ask someone their opinion on my situation. Sometimes their opinion triggers me and I'll say to myself, what does she know about me? That was awful advice. Then I ask someone else, maybe one of my brothers. And I don't know what it is, but my brothers have a brutal honesty that gives me comfort. My point is that all of us struggle with sticky emotions that slow us down. Some people are better at recognizing their emotions than others. Some people ignore their emotions. Some people project their emotions onto others. But the situation remains that fear and doubt have a place. I think so much of our progression through life has to do with acknowledgement and acceptance of difficult emotions. For me, acknowledging that I even feel fear is tough. I assume I'm rational until suddenly I feel physically uncomfortable. Then I focus on my body's response and I realize, geez, I'm feeling anxious about something. What is it? Once I acknowledge that I'm afraid of something, then I can take steps to ease it. But if I don't acknowledge it, it can go on and on and on. Sometimes it gathers strength by tying into other past and future fears. Then it becomes really complicated. Then I can't narrow my focus on one fear. This is why immediacy of awareness is so important. This is what all those spiritual teachers talk about when they say, be present. It simplifies our lives. It's not solving any problems necessarily, but simplifying ourselves feels like solving problems. As long as we're alive, we will have problems. Life is not about eliminating the problems. It's about encountering them with grace and ingenuity. So identify your fears, question them, gather information to understand them, and then make a plan. Let your fear be a visitor, not a resident. This is Kate Foley. Thank you for listening.